Hey guys, thanks for watching. Today I'm going to be making a pedal board. I've been wanting to make this project for a while to clean up the mess of guitar pedals that sits in front of my amp, and I only had a few hours to spend in the shop, and this is what I came up with. I'm using Sapele for this project, and I'll start by ripping the boards to length, and then I'll take them over to the joiner and the planer and get them to their rough dimensions. After that, I'll take the parts over to my workbench and use a hand plane to smooth out all the faces, just to get rid of any of the snipe or planer tracks that are left from the machines. I use my number 62 low angle plane for this. I've been using this plane a lot lately. I just got it for Father's Day, and hope to give you guys a review on it soon. Next, I'll cut all the boards to their final length using my table saw sled and a stop block attached to my fence. I used the stop block so that the board doesn't get pinched between the blade and the fence. The front of the pedal board, or the player side, is going to be 1.5 inches tall, and the back's going to be 4 inches tall. So I'll mark out 1.5 inches with my combination square and then strike a line from the back end of the board down to that mark. Then I'll tape the two sideboards together and use my bandsaw to cut the tapers. These cuts will have to be cleaned up later, so I just make sure to stay outside of the line when I make the cut. Then I'll take the parts back to my bench and use my hand plane to clean up all the bandsaw marks. The pedal board's going to be held together with through dovetails, so I'll start making those by getting the thickness of the front and the back boards, and I'll use my marking wheel to gauge that, and then I'll transfer that thickness over to the sideboard so I can start creating the tails. Now I can lay out the tail placement using my dividers. I'll use it to mark in from each end and then to find the center of the board as well. Then I'll use my marking knife and a dovetail guide to strike lines in where the dovetails are going to go. I'll use my dovetail saw to cut out the tails, and then I'll come back in with a coping saw and remove any of the waste in the middle. To remove the waste on the sides, I'll use my chisel to create a ledge that the saw can ride in, and then I'll just saw out both end pieces. Then I can chop out any waste that the saw didn't get with my hand chisel. I'll take a bunch of light passes, making sure that I end up with a good crisp line at the end. I'll chop halfway down the waste, and then I'll flip the board over and come in from the other side so I don't blow out the back of the board. Once the tail boards are complete, I can transfer the tails over to my pin board. I'll do this by sticking the pin board into my leg vise and then setting it at the height of a hand plane. The hand plane's there so that the tail board can rest up against it, and then I can accurately mark out where the pins are going to go. From here, making the pins are a lot like making the tails. I use the same tools, the dovetail marker, to mark everything out. I'll come back in with my dovetail saw and cut the pins. Cut the waste out with my coping saw, and chop everything out with my chisels. I'll repeat the same process for the back pin boards and the front pin boards. I'll use my chisels to clean everything up and keep sneaking up on the test fit until everything fits nice and snug, and hopefully there's no gaps. Once I've finished with all the dovetails and I've done a test fit to know everything's right, then I can glue up the assembly. I'll apply glue to all the pin boards and a little bit to the tails, and then I'll press everything together by hand. And if I need to, I'll come back in with some clamps just to kind of fine tune everything and then check it for square. If it's not square, I can take the clamps and adjust them just a little bit to bring everything in. While the glue's drying up on the pedal board, I'm going to create these two braces that'll go in the back of the board and the front of the board. They're going to have 10-degree angles cut on them so that they can hold some plywood on top, and that's where the pedals will sit. I created the angle on the rear brace by using a hand plane and planing it down, and on the front brace I just set the table saw to 10 degrees and ripped the board. Both ways work just fine. Once the glue had a couple hours to dry, I went back in with my hand plane and leveled all the surfaces, just cleaning everything up to make sure the sides and the top all were at the same level. Then I was able to work on the sides, planing all the dovetails flush with each other. This type of work is really where the low angle planes, either the jack plane or a low angle block plane, set themselves apart from a regular plane. That low angle just cuts through that end grain real smooth and doesn't have a lot of tear out. It just makes for a really good finish. And for the couple of small areas the grain did change direction on me, I just used a card scraper to clean up any little bits of tear out. After all the hand planing was done, I took my trim router and a roundover bit and just eased all the edges of the pedal board. Then I came back with some 220 grit sandpaper and just cleaned everything up. The pedal board's going to have an inlet and outlet jack as well as a power inlet. This way I can keep the power supply and all the cables for the pedals underneath the board and out of sight. So here I'm using a hole saw to cut out where the power inlet's going to be, and then I'll come back with a spade bit and cut out where the two jacks are going to go. On all the holes I'll start by drilling from the outside and then flip the piece over and finish the hole from the inside to reduce tear out. I'm going to attach the front and rear brace that I made earlier to the pedal board using glue and screws. So here I'm just drilling in a couple pilot holes for where the screws are going to go, and then I'll come back in and apply some glue, and then I can attach this to the pedal board. Now I can apply some finish to the case of the pedal board. I'm using Armor Seal from General Finishes for this. And while I'm applying this finish, now's as good a time as any to ask you guys, if you like this video, to please consider subscribing to the channel. I really like making these videos, and I hope you guys like watching them. Thanks. Next, I'm cutting out a piece of 1/4 inch plywood for the top of the pedal board. This is a mistake, and I'll explain what happened here in a second. So here at the router table, I'm cutting some slots into that piece of plywood so that the cables have a place to go through. And right about now is when I realized that this top with these slots in it are way too flimsy, and if I step on this to, step on one of the pedals, I'm gonna cave in or it's gonna bow too much. So to fix this, I could go one of two ways. I could get a thicker piece of plywood and then cut a rabbet into it around the edges so that it'll still sit flush against the top of the board, since I'd already installed them braces. But instead what I decided to do is cut another piece of 1/4 inch plywood just inside the diameter of this current piece of plywood, and then laminate the two pieces together. And I'll let this thing dry overnight. And once it's dry, I'll come back in and finish routing everything out. After routing out the two slots on the outside, I went ahead and gave it a test drive and stepped on it a couple times, and it didn't bow, so I added one more slot in the middle just to make cable routing a little easier when I install the pedals. Now I'm drilling a hole in the front and the rear brace that I'm going to add a 1032 threaded insert into. I want to be able to take the top on and off to change pedals out and arrange the wiring the way I want. So having these inserts will be nice so I can take the screws in and out without having to worry about messing up the hole. Now I'm ready to do the final install on the inlet and outlet jacks and the power inlet. These just get installed with some Phillips head screws, so I'll drill a couple pilot holes and then screw them in by hand. Off camera, I applied a couple of coats of matte black spray paint to the top piece of plywood, and here I'm just installing some Velcro strips to it so that I can attach the pedals to it later. This probably wasn't the cheapest way to go. I ended up buying some Velcro from the home center, 2-inch strips by 4 foot long, and I think they were like $9 or $10 a box. I think if I went to the fabric store, I probably could have found something a bit cheaper. Once I got all the Velcro installed to the plywood top, I'm ready to install it into the case. I'll put it in using those 1032s that I put the inserts in for earlier. I'm installing these 4 1/4 inch rubber feet to the bottom of the pedal board so it doesn't slide around when I step on it. And that finishes up this project. I still have a little bit of wiring to do, installing the power source and everything, but this is it for the woodworking part. I hope you guys liked this video, and if you did, again, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.